Senator Grassley, honorable senators, thank you for prioritizing this critical issue. Senator Grassley, I especially want to thank you for the legislation that you've championed to enhance the protection of these vulnerable children. Your insistence on calling for HHS to reform ORR is especially admirable. I also want to thank you for your ongoing investigation of potential trafficking and exploitation of children in the ORR program responsible for placing unaccompanied children with sponsors in the United States. Thank you, sir. In an effort to further understand the inner workings of trafficking, specifically child trafficking, I've interviewed former sex traffickers who are currently incarcerated or were incarcerated in the United States and abroad. Sadly, in my research, I found that there's a market for juvenile organ harvesting. Unaccompanied minors are especially vulnerable en route to the border of this threat. Cartels bring trafficking victims to the border and rely on a network of gangs to facilitate trafficking within the United States. Through research, I've uncovered the inner workings of stash houses that exist on both the U.S. and the Mexican side of the border. These stash houses are used to exploit trafficking victims. Stash houses work in a series of three. The first house is a processing center. The second house is where the actual exploitation occurs. The third house is where the final transportation arrangements are made for the victim. Cartels utilize cloud technology. They capture finances, how much the child has to work to pay off, as well as demographic information on these child trafficking victims. There's a digital trail that is completely being overlooked that is being used by the cartels. Cartels target migrant children for the purpose of exploiting them into the United States through the Unaccompanied Children program. Children in migrant groups are sold to traffickers when it's discovered that their families don't have the extra money to cover the unexpected expenses by the coyotes who are embedded within the migrant groups en route to the southwest border. While conducting research in a migrant shelter at the border, I learned of a mother who refused to let her child out of her arms. The mother explained to staff that she was robbed of her belongings en route to the southwest border, in addition to all of her property being stolen from her. So were the two other children that she started the voyage with. Post-placement protections for migrant children are completely inadequate. In one incident, law enforcement checked on the well-being of 25 UCs. It could only locate 2. Some sponsors reported the children never arrived. Through my research, I've discovered that ORR uses NGO contractors to manage influx facilities. There's a need for more ORR accountability within these facilities to ensure the safety of these migrant children. NGOs use staffing agencies to provide personnel. There's been a history of inadequately vetted staff having access to children without background checks and security clearances. While ORR has an on-site monitor, they receive filtered information from the NGO managing the influx facility. This filtered information involves what's occurring at the facility, and it prevents ORR from having visibility on incidents and whether ORR policies are being followed. The crisis involving exploitation through the UC program continues, and there is an urgent need for reform in managing the UC program to mitigate further exploitation and trafficking of children. Thank you for this opportunity, and I welcome your questions.